Hello everybody, this is Terry. Welcome back to my workshop. Today I'm going to be talking about the Tower Hobbies Seawind. This is a molded foam airframe. It has a wingspan of just under 57 inches. Now, Tower Hobbies sells this as a plug-and-play kit. And what that means is that it comes mostly pre-built and pre-finished like you see here. That also means that it includes nearly all of the electronics that you'll need. For instance, there are 7 servos in this airplane. All of them are factory installed. It also has a 900 kV brushless motor and a 40 amp speed control. Now there are some electronics that you will need to provide. For instance, you'll have to provide the transmitter and receiver for a radio system with at least 6 channels. I'm using a Spectrum IX12 transmitter, and inside the airplane I've installed a Spectrum AR637T receiver. In addition, you will also need to provide a 3-cell 2200 mAh LiPo battery. I'm using a Spectrum Smart G2 battery with a 50C discharge rate. Now let's talk about the basic features of the Seawind. It has your standard 4-channel flight controls of throttle, rudder, elevator, and aileron. It also has built-in flaps. The flaps are about half the span of the wing. I've got them set up on a 3-position switch. And while I'm talking about the wing, I will also point out that it has built-in navigation lights. It may be a little bit hard to see them in this brightly lit shop, but they really do help when you're flying in low light conditions. Now, let's look at the belly of the Seawind. This is a flying boat. You'll notice that the bottom of the fuselage is shaped like a boat hull. Also, the wingtips are curved down to act as tip floats. But that's not all. The Seawind also has retractable landing gear, and that makes this model a true amphibian. It can operate off of water, but also paved runways, grass, or as you'll see in a few minutes, it can also operate off of snow. Now there's one more thing I want to show you about the landing gear here. Pay attention to the tail when I retract the gear. You'll see that it also has a retracting water rudder. The rudder goes up when the landing gear comes down and vice versa. Pretty cool. Some of you sharp-eyed viewers out there are probably thinking to yourself, that model looks familiar. Well, you're exactly right. This is an updated version of a model that was released in 2016 under the FlyZone brand. There's really only 2 changes worth mentioning. The first is that the battery connector attached to the speed control is now a Horizon Hobbies EC3 connector instead of a Dean's Ultra plug. The other change worth mentioning is that the factory trim scheme has been updated. This newer trim scheme is much more colorful and includes lots of red paint. Assembly of the Seawind should not cause any problems for most modelers. You will not need glue or even a hobby knife. In fact, most steps require nothing more than a screwdriver. Now with that being said, I do have one tip to pass along that may save you some headaches. Notice that the access to the battery bay and the radio compartment is through this hinged canopy. The way you see it now is as far as that canopy opens. Now this amount of access is fine for days at the flying field where you're just swapping out batteries, but during assembly when you're connecting push rods and servo extensions toward the back of this compartment, the access is a bit limiting. So I recommend that you remove this canopy completely during assembly of the Seawind and then reinstall it before you're ready to go fly. I mentioned a few minutes ago that the Seawind has 7 servos, wingtip lights, and a speed control. If you can imagine, that's a lot of wires going into the radio bay that need to be connected to the receiver. And if you're not careful, all those wires can create a real tangled mess. So you want to invest some time to manage all those wires in a way that works for you. Now your task will be greatly simplified by the fact that all the factory wires are labeled with their intended function. Now doing this not only makes the radio bay look cleaner, but it also reduces the odds that any of those wires will impede the functions of the servos. I'm sure you've noticed that the Seawind is not a tiny airplane, so you'll be glad to know that the wings are removable. Each wing panel slides in place over a carbon spar. Built-in thumb screws lock the panels in place. Now, the aileron servos and wingtip lights connect with standard 3-wire servo extensions. The flaps, however, are a little bit different. Both flaps are actuated by a single servo inside the fuselage, so whenever you want to remove the wings, you must disconnect the flap push rods from that servo. Then the opposite is true when you want to reconnect the wings. To be honest, it's kind of a pain, so I think your average Seawind owner will keep the wings in place most of the time to avoid that hassle. Now let's talk about flying the Seawind. Recall from earlier that I installed a Spectrum AR637T receiver in this model. That receiver is capable of AS3X stabilization, safe stabilization, and even sending telemetry data back to the transmitter. But I did not activate any of those functions for my review of this model. So my impressions of flying the Seawind are based on flying it with a standard dumb receiver with no artificial stabilization. My overall impression of the Seawind is that it is a well-rounded sport model that most pilots will have no trouble taking around the pattern. Even when the control surfaces are set at their maximum throws, the control response is pretty gentle, so you probably won't be doing any snap rolls with this model. That being said, it is capable of some basic aerobatics. Loops and inverted flight are no problem at all. It will also do nice aileron rolls. Those rolls are a little bit slow, so just make sure to give yourself plenty of altitude or be prepared to input some elevator corrections halfway through the roll. The Seawind has a steerable nose wheel, so operating off of paved or smooth grass runways is no trouble for taxiing, takeoff, or landing. But you're probably also curious how the Seawind performs on water. Well, if I'm being completely honest, I don't know myself. As I record this, it's the middle of winter and I live in Wisconsin, so all of the lakes around me are frozen over at the moment. But that did afford me the opportunity to fly the Seawind off of snow, and that I can tell you about. When flying on snow, I keep the landing gear retracted so the bottom is completely smooth. But in my experience, neither the water rudder or the aero rudder are very effective in taxiing the Seawind on snow, so your best bet is to point the model into the wind directly before takeoff. After that, it's just a matter of smoothly advancing the throttle and then giving a little back pressure on the elevator when it reaches flying speed. Now, all of you northerners will know that not all snow is created equal, and I found that the Seawind slides easily across anything but the really wet, mushy, sticky kind of snow. Now, flying in winter also means that you're probably flying with a blanket of white on the ground and a blanket of gray in the sky, so visibility can be extra challenging. Because of that, I added a few stripes of red packing tape on the bottom of the wing to improve in-flight orientation. I mentioned before that the Seawind is easy to fly, and I stand by that. But you also have to recognize the effects of having this motor mounted up high. And basically, it means that the pitch trim will change whenever you move the throttle. The more dramatic your throttle movements are, the more dramatic the airplane will respond in pitch. For instance, as you throttle back to set up for a landing, you may notice that the nose pitches up a little bit. Inversely, if you slam the throttle forward to pull away from a touch and go, you may find yourself unintentionally back on the ground. Now, once you recognize this relationship and know how to manage it, it's really no issue at all. You can even use this throttle pitch coupling to perform some interesting maneuvers. I like to put the Seawind in a vertical climb, and at the top, I slam the throttle forward to pitch the model over back towards the ground without moving any of the control surfaces. This concludes my review of the Tower Hobbies Seawind. Keep watching for some more flight footage. Also, be sure to check out the written review in Model Aviation magazine. Thanks for watching.